Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. As we come to the end of the calendar year, we take the opportunity to reflect. We are joined by renowned agri-consultant Matt Ryan for a two-part interview. And on this episode, we discuss the challenges dairy farmers have faced through the decades. And he considers are the current challenges, such as environmental policy and regulation, the greatest challenges that we face yet. Matt, you are extremely welcome to the Dairy Edge.
Thank you very much, Emma-Louise.
Can you tell us, Matt, about your path that has led you to a career in dairy?
It's so long ago, Emma-Louise, I have nearly forgotten. But anyway, I was born in a place called Garvan, Cross, County Limerick. I specify Limerick, it's a mile and a half from the border. I went to primary school in Cross. Then went to secondary school in June. Obviously, that era you went by bicycle. Then, after leaving cert, I suppose I had nothing lined up, and I got an agricultural scholarship to Teagasc Agricultural College. Then, while a lot of those guys in that era, dairy was just beginning to open up. A lot of my colleagues went and got dairy science creamery managers to UCC, but I went accidentally or otherwise. I got a job as a laboratory technician in Unforest Luntis in the nematology department in Oak Park in 1963, and I spent 1 year there. An unusual experience. Nematology is associated with eelworm in sugar beet, and sugar beet was all the go during that era in that district. It's very interesting. I looked at myself and I said, God, am I going to be doing this for the rest of my life? And then in 1964, which was only 1 year after, I had money saved because we hadn't a penny at home. I went to college, UCD. I had to actually buy the matriculation. I had a very poor leaving cert, and so in 1969 I graduated from that after winning a few Fitzgibbonses along the way. So in 1969, believe it or not, we were just heading into the boom times, or I wouldn't say boom times, of dairying. And I started working. 5 of us started working as agricultural advisors under the Committee of Agriculture in Laois. And I stayed there until 1972, got a permanent instructor in Leitrim. And, you would say, God almighty, why am I going to Leitrim? Actually, I worked in a pilot area in Carrigal, and it was a great experience. I was standing on my own 2 feet. It was it was a tremendous. It was a pilot area where farmers got grants, believe it or not, in the present context for putting on lime, P and K, and it was very low administrative cost. The agricultural advisor signed off on it, which is a great thing for me. So then during that era, and Irish agriculture was only finding its feet, and the Kellogg Foundation was financing the education of people in around the world. And we in the advisory service, they were giving out around 12 scholarships to go back and do a master's. And lucky enough, I think it was 1972. I was only in Leitrim 1 year. Actually, ironically, when I was in Leitrim, I set up a machinery group, a kind of a discussion group. And one night in a pub in Carrigal, I collected £2,000 then to buy some backing things. But anyway, that's only a side. So then I did my master's, won another Fitzgibbon during that period. Came to North Prairie. In 1974, I think, and worked in the Boris Kay in Clough Jordan, out in the office from 74 to 72. Ironically, our Emma-Louise former connection with your farm, Ty Humphreys, told me there was 2 jobs going, one in Thurles and one in Nina. He said, I'll fix you up in a good area in Nina. And it happened to be he was living on your home farm, or around your home farm at that stage. So then in 1972, I became a dairy specialist with responsibility for promoting discussion groups. Really worked hard at that for maybe 7 or 8 years. And then in 2002-ish, I became program manager in dairy in Moore Park, and that took me up to retirement in 2009. I retired early-ish, and since then I have been a private consultant on my own, running about 5 discussion groups and doing a small bit of private stuff. And I have a new partner in now called Paddy Kelly, great fellow entirely. And yeah, so I'm enjoying every minute of my life since I left Teagasc. It has been tremendous for me. Yeah, so that's roughly a quick synopsis. Sorry.
A quick synopsis, but you fitted an awful lot in, Matt. I mean, if we look at it from a dairy perspective, like you mentioned, a career of roughly 40 years at Teagasc and in excess of a decade of agri-consulting since. Let's reflect on the challenges that you would have observed that dairy farmers have had to contend with in that time that have impacted on their farm businesses.
Yeah, it's a good question. And funny enough, somebody and you brought to my attention, somebody brought to our attention the challenges now are climate change, rising energy and input costs, food scarcity, rural decline, and staff issues. And of course, there are more, So then you equate them with the past and say, are they worse now than they were then? Look, some people kind of think they are. So I think I'd put it in a little context. People must remember that, say, in 1916, the average farm size was 14 hectares. And in 2010, it's 33. It's probably gone up to 40 now. We had 4.2 million cattle in the country. And we now, in 2010, we had 6.6, and it's gone up to 7 or 8 now. So look, it's to that background. The other thing was the small farm concept is really important. It came from the landlord background, yeah? So we had farmers that were afraid. They had conservative attitudes. And from a sociological point of view, it's terribly important to define how farming is seen in this community. So everything to a background when you're in farming revolves around being able to provide an income to feed your family, educate your family, and dare I say, dress your family. Because way back, the woman of the house was deemed to be responsible for the children's presentation at mass and at school. And of course, that turned back on the father if he wasn't providing. If he hadn't money, they look bad, So it's to that background I'm saying that's what causes stress, causes problem. And maybe it's not as bad now, but it's still an issue. So the basic challenges then arose from my life, from, say, milk prices being low relative to costs, given a low income and very poor living expenses, because they for the family to live on. You had animal disease was a major issue. Weather, you mightn't think it, but weather was a major issue then because we were saving hay. Personal health was a really major issue because people got TB, they got various sicknesses and badly covered, and they were working ferocious long hours. Interest rates then became an issue in the 70s, in the 80s, yeah? And environmental standards were still there. Maybe they were lax, but once we were in the EU, they were the drivers of the challenges.
It's interesting, Matt, you talk about the interest rate of the 70s and 80s, and, we would be quite used to a low level of interest rate at this point, but take us back there and what sort of interest rates were farmers exposed to?
Yeah, so interest rates don't become relevant unless you have borrowed money, yeah? And so we joined the EU in 1973. We doubled our milk production from 93 to 79 or something like that. So with that went investments. All animals I was talking to a guy yesterday about when you raised this with me, and people came into farming at 12 years old then, believe it or not, because everybody had even we had a man employed and we only had 10 cows at home. Labour was cheap. Very, very, very hard on labour. And once you came to 12 years of age, this man told me he became the farmer then with his father, and they let go the work. So it moved on from there to in the 70s, so that we began to double cow numbers. You needed facilities, you needed to change your attitude to borrow money. Yep. So so we're now driving on really fast. And there's a lovely saying goes, and it's still true. Dairy farmers have a thing called reality bias. You know, we are exuberant people, and I'd say you nearly know from my excitement now talking to you. You know, anybody associated with dairying is exuberant generally. So we have a kind of a reality bias, if you know what I'm getting at. So people made an expand. They never see some of the pitfall. We'll get the money somewhere, and we'll blah blah blah. You know, so yeah. So that's the driver. So so we arrived in the EU, and so all of a sudden quotas came in. Next thing, we are restricted. We have made developments and we have made plans and so on, and quotas are in. And lo and behold, inflation is rampant, and interest rate goes to, they went to 23%. Right? I remember well because I was buying a house. I had bought a house, you know, and built a house, and they were really, really tough times. Really tough. I couldn't tell you. It's estimated that about 7,000 farmers were severely compromised in that era. And I was talking to Michael Berkey about this too, of IFA, and he, in reminiscing, and every years too. And he told me that because IFA were very heavily involved in that era and sorting it out with the banks, and they did a great service to the country. Now, there is no doubt in the wide world. Tom Clinton eventually, you know, and he put down the boot light, but there was about 4,500 to 5,000 farmers really badly compromised, and they so you could think the pressure they were under. And I'll tell you a story about a farmer I had dealings with. Advisors then became very, very important, because you had to do farm plans for that 7,000 farmers to show that they could come out of this or get near coming out of that. And the banks did write off a lot of money, or write off money on some farms. And so I'll tell you a story about one guy. He was new to the community that I was involved in. He came from a different county and stuff like that. And he got into financial trouble because he had come from a county, got a farm from the Land Commission, and you know, all of a sudden found himself in financial trouble. So lo and behold, he had a very, very young family. He milked his cows every morning and got a job with a well-known company that made slats in the 80s in this general area, and went working there day in, day out. And his family and children worked harder at home, his wife in particular. And lo and behold, his son is there farming today after all that, and thanks to his ability or resilience to take that option and pride, you know, because farmers going out to work was a big cut-off point on pride, if you know what I'm getting at. It had an awful effect, you know, because people are talking about it in pubs and stuff. So that's a kind of a background to the interest rate thing. And like, I was involved in several plans to save farmers, and I look on those chaps now, and there's 3 farmers in particular not far away from here, and the sons or grandsons of them farmers are terrific farmers. So it's a great story in terms of resilience. And when the chips are down, farmers, they spend less, they work harder, and you know, they're resilient to come out of any sort of would-be crisis.
And Matt, I mean, I know now the interest rate isn't comparable, but is there a similar story right now where farmers have made huge investment in the lead up to the abolition of quotas and since? Yeah,
sure, they have. But farmers now are very well educated. Then, and I'm not, you know, farmers then had savvy. No education, but they really had great savvy, and so now we have the education. We have very, very well educated. We have, you know, we have great research. We have great. We still have great advisory service, and look at the animal health status of our herds now. Emma-Louise. It's totally different. I mean, health was if you've got salmonella or TB, and I was talking to a vet yesterday, and he was telling me, I was just kind of putting this thing together, talk about animal health. Excuse me. And this man had 10 cows. Lo and behold, obviously it's way back. And the man, and it's a local vet here, went out, excuse me, and he had to put down 9 of those cows with TB. Imagine 9 of those cows. The man has only 1 cow left. If that isn't a challenge to overcome, that man is still farming. They're farming 70 or 80 cows now.
Looking to joining the EU, you have mentioned it. How much of a deciding factor was milk quotas in terms of how we farmed from the 80s up until 2015?
Oh, it sure is an awful influence, huge influence. A lot of farmers, I take one example. I'll mention his name, a fella called Lexi Boland, a neighbour of yours, got a great fella. He worked on a guy called John Pole of Ballycronog, who had been on one of the early trips to New Zealand. So it was one of the very, very early share milking setups that were in place. John and Lexi, and then this farm outside Nina came up, and Lexi leased that. And he was a brave man just on the year before quotas came in, leased that farm and made a real go of it. And was restricted. Obviously, then you're restricted. And so how was he going to get on? He had, there's only one way to pay reasonably high rents, and that's dairying. And he set about overcoming the challenges that were there. He's my model that if I ever look back on anything that happened, Lexi is my model. And we did actually, ironically, we did a deal there on that farm to lease the cows in the early stage from the farmer in question, because he would have to pay too much income tax. And he went from there. That farm is a model farm, still in that lease arrangement to this day. And there's a lot of people listening today that would have served the farm apprenticeship with Lexi. You are more or less what you're promoting now. And so he leased it very expensively. You were supposed to lease the land with it. People got over that. They paid fierce money for courses. We'll call it good farmers, and it stood them in good stead. They knew by doing the sums they'd make some little bit of money. Scale was always cutting down on the overheads, and so those farmers who leased in the 80s have come good. They overcame that through good knowledge, very, very high quality farming, and did their financials to know that it gave them a margin, even though other farmers would have thought it was lunacy. Yeah.
And I guess if we bring things back to present time, Matt, you mentioned things like climate change, rural decline, and input prices. And I suppose when we look at climate change, it really, from a dairy farming perspective, it is the regulation and policy that is imposed as a means of, stopping or slowing down the rate of climate change. On top of that, I would say there are possibly challenges that are to the forefront of people's minds, like the limitations co-ops have to process new milk. And also maybe alternatives to dairy products that we're aware of. Is what we're facing now, is this a bigger challenge that what you have illustrated from the past, or is it much of the same?
It's much of the same, and I think we're in a better position to deal with it. Like, if you think, a lot of people some people that are listening maybe will know, like all our products in the 60s and 70s were exported to England, and they weren't called John Bull for nothing, and they decided what money they'd give us. We were at the whims of the UK for a market, and we were in a very, very bad place. Yourself, God, if you weren't able to sell your cattle, and we were all mixed farms then, so the cattle was a major part of the income. So yeah, so we were really struggling then in our markets. We're markets all over the world now, and we have a great product. I think relatively speaking, I think can be as positive, a lot more positive than we overcame some fierce challenges in the past, and now I think we can. I'm not saying easy overcome it, but I'm very, very, very confident that we can overcome. I said to myself 2 years ago, because obviously I'm in trial out of my years, I would love to be an agricultural back again, starting now, because we have so much going for us. We have really so much going for us. Okay, there is a type of quota there now, but we can improve cow performance further. All the things that DBI has delivered for us, we can improve that a lot further. Consequently, I think the stocking rate will get over that. And I really emphasize the reality bias that we have in dairy farming, so that we, maybe need to be a little bit more careful and concentrate on the things that we can now control, if you know what I'm getting at.
And Matt, before we wrap up, you have boasted a lot of Fitzgibbon medals at the outset of this conversation. Many have tried and failed in that feat. Talked about the sport in your life. We've spoken to a few farmers who really benefit from physical activity. And how did that work alongside your career at Teagasc?
I always claimed I was good at nothing, but I worked hard at everything. Very, very poor hurdler and stuff like that. And I won a Limerick I shouldn't tell anybody this. I won a Limerick Senior Championship in 1964. And I won the North Prairie Junior Championship in 1994. Beaten in the county final, killed me in 1994. But I made a huge effort. But I love competition. I love putting in the effort. I would be regarded as a poor hurler. I had a very poor leaving cert. I didn't let that hold me back. And so I think people can, with determination, can get there, So, and I made a lot of friends, very, very, very few enemies on the hurling field, in case you think, maybe a few in Tumivara, but anyway, I haven't time to tell you the story about them, but but it was a major part of my life. I actually think I would have been a great hurler, except that when I was growing up, we hand milked, of course, and I was useless at it. But we had this carry on of 12-hour milking, 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the evening. Training would be 7:30 or 8. So your chances to get more training in time were nil on a bicycle. So if I only knew then what I know now, that a 16 8-hour milking interval gives you the same amount of milk as a 12-12, I would have been a lot better hurler. When you're working hard, I think you need outlets. And I think if farmers need anything, they need outlets at present. I'll just tell you one story before I go. I wonder, do people take as much holidays now as they should? But we always had hard times at home. We have 10 cows. You haven't much of a living on that. But my mother and father always went on a holiday. That's a fierce, important statement. I remember from the early 50s. My mother went to Lisdoonvarna on her own. They couldn't go together, but they went on their own. And my father went to a cousin who was involved in the criminal milk suppliers down in Waterford, my mother's cousin, actually. So they went on holidays. And I'm saying it's fierce important that people have sport or have some outlets to go for a break, or go, and to make absolutely certain they go for a break holiday.
That has been a fascinating conversation, Matt, and a wonderful opportunity to reflect on the many challenges that dairy farmers have faced through the years, and how farmers have really demonstrated resilience to come through those. Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome, Emma-Louise.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Matt Ryan for joining me on this week's show. We are fortunate that Matt will return next week to discuss how farmers have adopted new practices in an effort to achieve technical excellence for their farms. From all the Dairy Edge team, we wish you a happy Christmas. Join us again next week for your dairy edge.